Good morning. How democratic is truth? I found it fascinating when I was reading through this week's lesson that he talks about this concept that spiritual truths, subtle truths, can do far more harm to the doubter, to those that are not ready. And interestingly enough, in this world as it is, he uses the example of intercontinental ballistic missiles and hijacked airplanes. And of course, we resonate with the truth of what damage in the wrong hands that can do. Great loss of life, great misery, leads to world wars, leads to continuing world wars. So you have this interplay of here's this message that the spiritual truths, the subtle nature of the spiritual truths are potentially more dangerous than things that we fear deeply and have known to cause great suffering in this world. And so it makes you wonder, what could that be like? How do we understand that kind of a statement? And why would it be important, as this lesson talks about, to make sure that the spiritual truths on the deepest level are shared with individuals who are ready to receive them? And of course, that's part of the challenge here. It does help to be ready to receive them. And so whatever layer of truth or level of truth that we currently understand and can comprehend and are comfortable working with, we know that there's always a deeper layer, a deeper level to understand. And of course, as they also said in this reading, the challenge is essentially that the possibility exists through the doubt. In other words, hearing truth that's more than you can absorb creates a doubt within you that any of it could be true. And that delays the soul's natural evolution back to the home in God. And so that's where it is. We're talking about physical death and suffering, even on a worldwide level, compared to the evolution of the soul and the soul's journey back to God. Interesting balance. That's how powerful God feels about the divinity of the soul within us, and how subtle our challenges are. Doubt creeps in almost anything. It's not an unusual experience for a devotee to have doubts. And as I was pondering this, I started rereading The New Path, the book of Swami Kriyananda, who's the founder of Ananda. And he tells us in his story that he was always beleaguered by doubt. It was one of those things that he really struggled with. And he, from an early life, he had challenges, health challenges. Like many of us, he didn't always fit in, and so sometimes was bullied by other people, wasn't always welcomed into whatever group that he was trying to be a part of. And wondering, what is it about me that makes me not be able to, see the world the same way as other people? And, you grow up with that concept, you become a young person, he goes off to college, and he has a philosophical bent. And so again, he has this keen intellect. So he's trying to use his intellect to help understand these deep truths. And so he goes through many, many observations and experiences trying to figure out how to come to God through the intellect. And of course, you can't do that. You need intuitive feeling. You need to have the perception of the divine in order to help you move forward the concept of devotion. And, he used to admire individuals who were self-confident, who knew exactly what they wanted. They were going to get their business degree. They were going to marry their high school sweetheart. They were going to have, a life, all laid out for them. They knew exactly what they wanted. Well, he knew what he didn't want. He didn't want that. And so it's like, okay, now what do I do? How do I find what it is that I want? And, he goes through a variety of things, not only before finding a spiritual path and coming to Yogananda, but even after. And I wanted to read a passage from the New Path, just to start it. As it turns out, this is on the very first page, which I found just amazing, because it's like, really? So chapter 1, the pilgrim whittles his staff. There are many times when a human being, though perhaps not remarkable in himself, encounters some extraordinary person or event that infuses his life with great meaning. My own life was blessed with such an encounter more than 60 years ago in 1948. Right here in America, of all lands, the epitome of bustling efficiency, material progressiveness, and pragmatic know-how. I met a great God-known master whose constant vision was of eternity. His name was Paramahansa Yogananda. He was from India, though it would be truer to say his home was the whole world. Had anyone suggested to me prior to that meeting that so much radiance, dynamic joy, unaffected humility, and love might be found in a single being, I would have replied, though perhaps with a sigh of regret, that such perfection is not attainable by man. And had anyone suggested to me further that divine miracles have occurred in this scientific age, I would have laughed outright, for in those days, proud as I was in my intellectual 20th century wisdom, I mocked even the miracles of the Bible. No longer. I have seen things that made a mockery of mockery itself. I know now from personal experience that divine wonders do occur on earth. And I believe that the time is approaching when countless men and women will no more think of doubting God than they doubt the air they breathe. For God is not dead. It is man only who dies to all that is wonderful in life when he limits himself to worldly acquisitions and to advancing himself in worldly eyes, but overlooks those spiritual realities which are the foundation of all that truly is. That's how this book starts. And it is a wonderful reminder of what we're doing on the spiritual path, because Swami's life and the doubts that he had, we all share, not his particular doubts per se, but we have doubts, we have confusion, we have misunderstanding. And if we're lucky as devotees, we oftentimes will have a touch of the divine. In other words, we know we're on the right track, and we practice our concentration techniques and our meditation, and we do selfless service for others, and we grow our devotion and our love, and we try. And sometimes when we try, something happens. Sometimes it's something good, and it's a really delightful experience and deep understandings. And sometimes doubt takes over. And there's a story in Swami's life that after he met Yogananda, one of the things that he did was Yogananda asked him to edit some of his teachings. And, as a very intellectual young man, but new on the path, he thought, okay, I'll be glad to serve in this way. I know how to write a little bit. I know how to craft words. And so, okay. And he spent a fair amount of time out at 29 Palms with Yogananda while he was doing starting this particular task. And when he read the commentaries that Yogananda had asked him to edit, he felt as if some intrusive, insidious serpent had jumped into his mind with a thought. And the thought is, he does not have wisdom. This is the thought that Swami had regarding the teachings of Yogananda. He does not have wisdom. And just, for those of you that have followed the life of Swami Kriyananda and are disciples of Yogananda, give pause there. Can you imagine how awful that would be? And Swami recognized it as something that resonated with the doubt within him, but it was another force that was coming into him to derail him from the process. And so here we are with this aspect on a subtle level, is you resonate with the things that are already troubling you, and then you have it. And it was to the point that this inner thought that had intruded on him, if the guru said, oh, it's a beautiful day in Los Angeles, the thought would sneer, it's probably raining. I mean, literally, every little thing, regardless of how insignificant, was completely pushing away the thought and the teachings that he had been so humbly seeking. So what did he do? He obviously had to just keep fighting through it. And that is what he did. But part of his confusion is understandable, because in the early days, Yogananda, when he created these articles, he would dictate them and then forget about them. He'd dictate them, give them to the editors, give them to other people to publish. And sometimes some of the terms he was using were in Sanskrit. And so the translations weren't always accurate. And even more interestingly, and of course I'm sure Swami Kriyananda would have loved to have known this beforehand, some of the editors interjected some of their thoughts and eccentricities into the process. So here he is with something and he's trying to make sense of it, and it makes no sense, and it looks like it's translated wrong, and gosh, I don't think Master Yogananda would ever say that. And of course he didn't. That was one of the ones that got stuck in there by someone else. And of course, his interpretation is, he has no wisdom. As we know, he overcame that. And for us, part of the interesting aspect of that challenge of doubt and observing ourselves and the intrusion of other forces, not necessarily conducive to our spiritual development, is that he understood, and again, this is with time, that one of the reasons that Yogananda asked him to teach was to help him in the ability to overcome doubt, to be able to see the miracles all around, to be able to help others untangle the web of confusion and doubt that stymies us, stops us in our tracks. And he sees, by helping and sharing these teachings and muddling his way through trying to find truth and watching and supporting others as they did the same thing, his own faith and the faith of others grew. They grew in wisdom. They grew in truth. They grew in their ability to perceive greater truths. And of course, I'm saying they and we, but it's we, because we're still part of this story. We're part of the ongoing story of the devotee trying to overcome whatever self-created delusions we have. Individually, we have. We all have challenges where it's like, gosh, I'd be so glad to be done with this. And you get up the next day, you try again, and still there. And 10 years later, still there. It's like, am I ever going to be done with this, Lord? And of course, what happened in Swami's life was they took that very challenge and used it as a vehicle, not only to help him in understanding, but to help others in their understanding. So whenever you're going, why me? Why this? How come? Look at it from the perspective of what's the spiritual opportunity? What am I supposed to be learning here? And through that learning and understanding, how do I arrive at deeper truths and share them with others? Now, in the readings, one of the things that also was mentioned as the affirmation that was read is concentration. And I was looking through that, and I've been lucky for the most part that mental concentration, in other words, focusing my mind, gratefully has been something I'm relatively, I do okay with. Not always, but generally. And then I started reading closer. And it said concentration isn't just the mental exercise of controlling your thoughts, but it's of pouring in your love, your devotion, your aspirations in life. And I went, whoops, because my level of concentration doesn't normally reach that level. And then it starts to talk about this concept of God as the most relishable. the most relishable. And I'm going, what does that mean? I mean, I've had experiences of the sense of divine love, and I've seen other people reflect God's love and kindness and observe minor miracles that occur all around us in the world. But it's like, what does God being the most relishable really mean? And I had this humorous flashback to myself as a young woman. And I think it was in college age, but I met some young man in that situation, and I was just immediately enraptured by him. You know, he was nice looking, and he was kind, and he was intelligent, and he was gentle, and he was, he had a lot of wonderful qualities. And I didn't know him well, and you're going to laugh at the end of this story, but, so I started to realize that I was thinking of him frequently. Am I going to see him on campus today somewhere? Sometimes we would pass or have lunch together or someplace, or see him across the field at a sport event or whatever. But I started to spend more of my time literally thinking about this young man. Oh, he complimented my dress. Does that mean he loves me to wear blue? Does he like me as much as I like him? I never got to the point where I was actually writing my name and trying to say, like, the little girls do, where they write out their name and say, Mrs. So-and-so, so-and-so. I never actually got that far. But I was really enraptured by this young man. And, the folly of it is, and this is one of the things, is that eventually he said, we're going to have a party at my place. Why don't you bring your friends? And I thought, okay, I'd like to, meet his friends and be at his house, etc. And so I brought a few of my friends, and I went to the house, and we were, being introduced around. Everybody's nice and polite, etc. And then he walks me up and he introduces me to this young woman. I'd like you to meet my girlfriend. And there I am with all my, little infatuation thoughts just crashing to the floor in front of me. It was just like, there I had built up this nothing, because I'd only known the man a couple of weeks. It wasn't like it was, I was creating this really big thing. But I acknowledged the infatuation that I felt towards him. And here's this woman who's his girlfriend. And I went, oh, okay, never mind. Let's cancel all those little fantasies that were floating around. But nonetheless, the feeling, it was pretty annoying, actually, because I literally would get out of bed and think of him. I would then have breakfast and wonder if he liked that food. I would get dressed and wonder if he would admire whatever outfit I had on. I mean, it was to that degree. It's really silly, but it happens. Hopefully I'm not the only one who's ever had an experience like that, or I'm going to feel real silly. But nonetheless, there we are, and you have this experience, and then it comes crashing at your feet. But the spiritual truth that I wanted to share here isn't my humiliation at making, something out of nothing, but the fact that it was an experience of putting all of my concentration, every thought, every action, into the process of loving something, someone. And of course, God, the most relishable. So it's like, okay, a little taste. Obviously, there's a lot of room for growth in that aspect when it comes to really living your life for God. But it's a beautiful reminder of how everyday little things can help remind us of deeper truths. One of the other things about the idea of doubt is that we contradict. In other words, when Swami was talking, I'm going back to when Swami Kriyananda was trying to edit Yogananda, one of the things that happened for him was kind of a clash of worldviews, because Swami was more of the Western mind, the either-or kind of mind about truth. It has to be this or it has to be that. Well, from the Hindu tradition, truth is many-faceted. And so he would read a translation of a passage that Yogananda said, such and such means whatever. And then a little bit farther along, it would be contradicted by another meaning. And this is, of course, in that stage where he was really doubting. He has no wisdom. He keeps contradicting himself left and right. What is going on here? And then, of course, over time, he started to understand that scriptural truths are indeed multifaceted. And we need to embrace them in that regard. They are not as rigid as yes or no, either and. It has to be more expansive. And so he also observed that truth is like the hub of a wheel. The closer you get to the center of the hub, the more that particular truth radiates throughout the underlying aspects of life. So the more central the truth, the more subtle it is. And again, this is over many, many years of discipleship. It's not something that he instantaneously came through. He fought through it the whole time. But he also learned to grow in understanding and grow in devotion, and to learn to perceive the divine instead of simply trying to think the divine. By thinking, we cannot come to understanding of God. God needs to be perceived through intuitive, devotional feeling. Channeling your heart's feelings with faith, adding your aspirations to all that you are doing. How many of us spend each day being able to do that? Or even remembering occasionally throughout the week to try. Every aspect of your affirmation, your aspiration, focused one-pointedly on whatever it is in front of you in each moment. But that is the pathway back to God, to be so focused and allow ourselves to feel the divine presence working through that. We're not all equally ready for the truth. As it says in the reading, never speak these truths to one without self-control, one who mocks, one who doubts, one does not offer service to me, and one who does not truly want to hear. And so this idea of universal truths, it's like, well, why would God hide the truth from us? And of course, in essence, he doesn't. What really happens is we have to prove ourselves ready to perceive it. And when I was contemplating that idea of being able to be ready to perceive the truth, talk about a lack of concentration, my mind went to this little venue of a movie. Some of you have seen this movie. Forgive me if I get the title wrong, but in general, there's this story. Tom Cruise is a young JAG officer, and he's sent to investigate a situation that happened on Guantanamo Bay. And he encounters a Marine general, and the drama unfolds. And in this drama, there's this setup, this conflict. And Tom Cruise, as the investigator, does start to get an idea of what the truth is behind what happened. And yet he starts to get feedback from his higher-ups that, what you're thinking about is really career suicide. If you go after that general and you can't make it stick, you're done for, Find a new career. Your career as a law officer, a lawyer, is over. And yet, as we know, for those of you that are familiar with this movie, and the wonderful line that this conflict leads to, and Tom Cruise, as the young lawyer, finally gets under the skin of this cunning, very capable general. And the general stands up fiercely and says, "You can't handle the truth!" So there we are. We can't handle the truth, always, until we're ready to receive it. But that was a digression of my mind. See how concentration can take you into all sorts of funny little places? But it's instructive, because we do have to remember that ultimately we as devotees will be able to uncover even the deepest spiritual truths if we simply stay the course. It's not hidden from us, at least not for eternity, forever. It's simply disguised for a while until we can wisely make use of it. Now, in this process of looking at ourselves, perhaps using introspection, saying, okay, how am I doing? Because the Bhagavad Gita gives us this aspect of, well, okay, How am I doing with self-control and concentration? How am I doing with devotion? Do I really see God as the most relishable? Am I there yet? The other question is, how do I do service to God and Guru? Do I do it selflessly? Do I do it grudgingly? Do I do it at all? These are just questions of introspection to try to figure out. Do I have ears that will hear? Or do I occasionally mock God? And we all get to answer those questions for ourselves. So regardless of where you think you fall on those categories, and if it was one of those questions, rate yourself from 1 to 10, many of us would come away, if we were honest about ourselves, maybe not scoring such high levels. Doesn't mean we're bad devotees, it just means we have a way to go. But I want to tell you a story that will help you regardless of where you think you fall on that category, if you rate yourself with dispassion, with sensitivity. And it's a story that Yogananda tells of his sister Roma and her husband Satish. And Yogananda was visiting his sister at one point, and she expressed to him a concern that her husband Satish tended to mock her devotion and to mock her gurus and to mock her aspirations towards knowing God. And it was very hurtful for her. And she'd hoped that maybe somehow Yogananda could intercede and maybe help her husband have a change of heart. And they sat and meditated together, and Yogananda had an inspiration. And he says, well, let's do this. Let's do a trip together tomorrow. Let's go to, and I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, Dakshinaswar Temple. Get it close? Anyway, yes, Goddess Kali is there. The Goddess Kali is in that temple and has been known to come to life for Sri Ramakrishna, another wonderful saint of India. And so Yogananda takes his sister and his carping brother-in-law to the temple. And the brother-in-law knows, I know what you're doing. You're not going to have an impact on me. And I want to make sure that you make arrangements for lunch for me, because I'm willing to be here, but I want to be fed. And so Yogananda goes into meditation, and he just says, yeah, whatever, don't worry about it. It'll be taken care of. And he goes and he sits in meditation. And they arrive at 7 a.m. in the morning, and then by noon, after 5 hours of meditation, Yogananda is a little bit disappointed that Goddess Kali did not come to him. The statue did not come to life. And they were closing the temple for the lunch break. And so he got up from his meditation and stepped out. And as he stepped out with bare feet onto the stone pavement there, his feet were burned. And he's going, oh, come on, Divine Mother. It's bad enough that you didn't answer my prayer and come to life, but now you're making me suffer burned feet. And instantly there was a response. A cool, cold air blew down his back and underneath his feet, and his feet were comfortable again. And he went into ecstasy. And he looked at the temple, and the temple doors opened, and the scene magnified the temple and Mother Kali. And Mother Kali grew up out of the temple and came in front of him. And he was in this ecstatic experience of her for a while. And as he was seeing with sight divine, he noticed his brother-in-law sitting underneath a tree. And he goes, I want you to, talking to Divine Mother, I want you to intercede, if you will, for my brother-in-law. Can you please help him to have a change of heart regarding the divine? And sure enough, no more than, and she hadn't said anything to him, but she agreed at this point. She agreed, it is done. And as no sooner had she said that than the brother-in-law popped up from wherever he was sitting, and he came running towards Yogananda. It's 1 o'clock! He had an hour missing there, because he stepped out at noon, and now it's 1 o'clock, so he was in ecstasy for this hour. And then there's no food, and there's no sign of food, and there's no way. And Yogananda looks at him, Divine Mother will take care of us. And of course, the brother-in-law scoffingly says, I want to see this Divine Mother of yours get us fed. And no sooner does he say that than across the temple comes this monk quietly, And he says to Yogananda, "Young sir," Mukunda at the time, "I noticed your party arriving. And even though it's against temple rules to set aside food for people who have not made arrangements with it previously, I just felt so inspired by watching your meditation. You were so aglow with love for God that I just felt inspired to set aside lunch for you and your companions." And the brother-in-law, they tried to eat the meal. Yogananda makes a wry comment that the brother-in-law was there, and he kind of seemed to have lost his appetite. Wasn't really sure about eating this particular meal, and he was obviously pondering things. And Yogananda didn't say anything to them. They went home, and Yogananda left he and Roma, his wife, together. And the next morning, he came back to see his sister. Well, as you can imagine, when Divine Mother says that she's created a change of heart for us, or in this case, Satish, then it does indeed happen. And what he did then was he apologized to his wife for scoffing at her beliefs. And he said and made a promise that I will speak no word to Mukunda, your brother Yogananda, until I have understood more deeply the spiritual truths. And he became a very sincere and deep devotee. And years later, when Yogananda went back to India and visited with his family, he could see the spiritual growth that had been made by this individual who completely scoffed at God. So when you're observing yourself in this game of how am I doing? Was my rating okay? Remember grace. Do your best anyway, regardless of whether you think you're passing or failing the grade. Do your best. And then trust in the aspect of grace to occur, because it sneaks up on us silently. And suddenly we have insights into things that could help us to understand God as the nearest and the dearest. Nearer than the near, dearer than the dearest. And God is right there with us. And we will understand. It's our birthright, remember. We will understand God's deepest truths within ourselves.